Hello my dear viewers, welcome to a new episode. In the book, History of Animals, Aristotle writes about a huge fierce bird looking like a phoenix, called Cynomolgus, Cinnabon? Or the cinnamon bird. He was named that because it used to collect cinnamon from unknown places and build his nest. This bird, as described by Herodotus in his book, The History, resided in the Arabian Peninsula, the only region at the time that sold cinnamon to the world. For the bird to avoid the thieves who want to take his cinnamon, and put it on the Cinnabon, it used to build its nest on mountain slopes or high trees. The only way for the Arab traders to take cinnamon from it was to kill oxes and huge animals and cut them into pieces, then leave them in places where the bird can see this chopped up meat, while they're hiding. When the bird goes for that meat, and tries to take the ox up to his nest, the nest doesn't hold up the ox's weight and it falls down. That's when the fast trader goes to collect the cinnamon, before the bird that carries oxes attacks him. I won't deny that this story might seem fictional about a mythical bird that the Arabs may have invented to remain in control of cinnamon trade, and push people away from knowing the source of the cinnamon. And that's actually all true. The Greeks and Romans bought it, to the point where Herodotus and Aristotle wrote about it as if it was real. The question begs itself, with all due respect for cinnamon, why something as insignificant as cinnamon needed to be protected and kept a secret by inventing weird stories. Let me tell you a truth, that cinnamon was more expensive than gold. Imagine your wedding ring being a cinnamon. The cinnamon bird story might be the least of what happened for the sake of spices trade. Let me tell you, that out of man's greed to get these spices, he drew the modern map of the world, set the features of world economics, and founded globalization between continents. All of that with spices? Maybe it would work in the exams. Let me start with the pioneers of all fields, ancient Egyptians. In Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical papyri, 1500 BC, their medical recipes included caraway, coriander, fennel seeds, mint, poppy seeds, onion, and garlic. Wait. Abo mead, onions and garlic are spices? Is Tom and Jerry real? Wake up. But that's a good question. Let's agree, between us at least, what are spices and what are not? Spices are plants, whether seeds like cardamom or roots like ginger and or tree bark like cinnamon, or leaves like curry and laurel, or fruits that are different from herbs. Herbs could be leaves, flowers, or plant stems that we use for flavor or food decoration, like basil, coriander, and dill. In a stretch, and I apologize for those who this might upset, we can say that herbs are fresh while spices are dried. Not a big difference, we use both, to add flavor or color to the food. Fresh or dried, ground like turmeric or whole seed like fennel and mustard seeds. We're talking about plants with flavor. Onions, also called tree onions, come out of the soil in the shape of an onion. The garlic and vanilla are spices. We take vanilla from a tree called Vanilla planifolia. Despite your sarcasm and trying to joke and make girls laugh, this tree does belong to the Orchidaceae family. Around 110 trees where we extract vanilla powder. Abo mead, what about sugar? Is it spices? Sugar comes from plants and gives flavor to food. Back in the day, they used to count it as a spice. It was soft form and needed lots of work, labor, harvesting, and collecting, so it was in a small amount. It entered England with ginger and the rest of tropical spices, so only the rich people used it. A pinch on food to season the dish. But the sugar we know now is a sweetener. It isn't a part of a plant, it's purely a chemical compound. It's consisted of glucose and fructose forming disaccharide sucrose. UQD sugar. Even its name is quirky. Disaccharide. You know what it's like. Salt. Salt isn't spices. Really? With all due respect to IKEA's spice holders, salt comes from the sea and salt rocks. All good now, my friend? We're clear on the spices? Let's get back to history. Onions and garlic were significant and special for Egyptians. And still, Abo mead, our food knows in Tutankhamun's tomb, there were garlic cloves, and they carved cloves out of wood, to be fresh in the other life. And for him to take the breath of life when he wakes up. That's true, though it increased one's durability. It's said that the pyramid builders ate onions and garlic to have a strong health. Not just that, they also imported cardamom from Ethiopia. Ethiopia was famous for Berber spices, like ginger, basil, and kororima, a cousin of ginger. There's also ajwain seeds. These things all grow in Ethiopia. Spices weren't only in Africa. The Chinese emperor's men in the 3rd century BC, they used to put cloves in their mouths so when they talk with the emperor, their breath smells good. It's not a kiss. The Sumerian clay tablets, in the 3rd millennium BC, had writings about plants which smell like thyme. There were writings in Ashurbanipal's library about aromatic plants like cumin, anise, coriander, garlic, saffron, and dill. Romans excessively used spice and herbs. They used them in wine to give it color and flavor. They used them in medications, compresses, and therapeutic patches, and aromatic oils after showers. During the Roman Empire, there was a trade with the Arabian Peninsula to exchange cassia, cinnamon, and other spice. That was the period when they invented the cinnamon bird story. Of course, there was another region we all know that has tons of spice, like where? Southeast Asia, which had the paradise of spice, India. You know where the name, Boharat, spices in Arabic, came from. From India itself, it's called Bharat in Sanskrit. India as the foreign name like Egypt, were called Masr. Anyway, the Arab traders traveled the desert, carrying spices and expensive goods to trade with India and China, and buy some of their spices. The cultures met and were affected by one another. The Chinese authors took stories from the Arabs and vice versa. But the Arab traders' transit on the way was Southeast Asia's islands. They resided there and established markets. There were a group of islands in the Indonesian Sea, where cloves and nutmeg grew, called the Moluccas Islands, named after the Arabic word, al-Muluk, kings. The Arabs called it, Muluk Islands, Moluccas, kings, and also Spices Islands. That's how important it was. Some researchers say that these are the lands that who was searching for. He stumbled upon the Americas while searching for the spices. It was a side effect discovery in the spices quest. To discover America, that's now the biggest economy and the winner of World War II. When Columbus went to America, he found the native inhabitants, so he thought he made it to eastern India, and named them American Indians. He executed 12 million of them. It's not accurate to blame spices for that matter, but it was the start point. Arabs lived in the Moluccas Islands, and got married there, and in other parts in Southeast Asia. After Islam, the trade continued. The native people liked Islam, and in the 13th century, the royal family in Sumatra converted to Islam, and Islam spread all over the region. 13% of the world's Muslims are in Indonesia alone. It's a huge number, my friend. Muslims were affected by the spirituality in Buddhism in that region, so they gained a spiritual Sufi perspective. That's why the Asian Muslims are more inclined towards Sufism. Arab bought spice, silk, and others, and then get back to the Red Sea, then to the Gulf of Suez, welcome, we're in Egypt. Then take the Nile to the harbors of the Mediterranean Sea, especially Alexandria, and who shopped there? As is gelato, my friend, Italians did. The traders of Venice. Venice Film Festival? No, my friend, Venice the city itself. Venice monopolized the trade of spices that came from Middle and Far East to Europe. They set high prices for the spices. Won't someone go get spices so we compete them in the market? At that time, Portugal was the pioneer of navigation in the world, and Manuel I, the King of Portugal, decided. CR7, ABO Mead? Knock it off. He decided to send an exploration trip to get these spices. After a few tries, he sent the Portuguese explorer, Vasco da Gama. That man found Muslims in control of the trade and navigation routes, so he took his ships, left Europe, and traveled around Africa, through the Cape of Good Hope. And the same way that Columbus took his ships to America, Vasco da Gama took his ships to the western coast of Africa. He wasn't the first to arrive, but his arrival led to Portugal's dominance over human trafficking. They built Portuguese colonies to produce an increasing resource of kidnapped Africans and selling them in Europe as slaves. After that, the news spread in Europe, and England, Spain, Netherlands, France, and Denmark all get involved. What is this, group stage? No, they got involved to steal the world's resources, and the resources of the natives. They wanted to divide the continent between them. You take the one with the vanilla, it's on the coast with a shore. I took it for my daughter yesterday, but when I saw you, I said you should take it, and I'll take that other one with turmeric, ginger, and chili. Anyway, Vasco da Gama's exploration trip continues to India, and thus begins the Portuguese colonized empire in Asia. They built centers in Kochi, Kozhikode, and Goa. Wasn't it hot, ABO Mead? What was? They started taking over more parts in India, Malacca in Malaysia, and other important regions in Asia. They arrived at China, and took over the trade routes between Japan and Europe. Spain was watching from afar and jealous, but unfortunately it didn't have a navigation experience like Portugal. A Portuguese man came along you might know called Ferdinand Magellan, traveled and fought with the Portuguese in India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. but they accused him of illegal trade. He suggested a new route for spice trade on Manuel I and he refused. So he dropped his loyalty for Portugal. Shame on you, Ferdinand. He went to Spain and got the citizenship. The King Charles V made use of this, someone who knows about navigation, so he gave him 5 ships to sail, and monopoly rights for 10 years for any route he discovered plus a revenue percentage. He left from Western Europe towards South America's southern strait, named after him. Wow, abo Meade, the strait knew he was coming, so it named itself after him? Stop it. Magellan arrived at last. The Spanish then discovered the Philippines archipelago, and gradually colonized it. They then settled down in the Spices Island, Tidor, where a war started between them and the Portuguese in Ternate. Until they agreed on Treaty of Zaragoza, Philippines is for Spain, and Portugal takes the Moluccas island that has cloves and nutmeg, because they arrived first. Let me tell you, that the Portuguese Empire remained vicious in Asia, until the end of the 16th century, when the Portuguese back home started a civil war. The Spanish king Felipe II took advantage of that and took over it, which led to the Iberian Union, a union between Portugal and Spain. That's when the Portuguese colonies in Asia started to fall apart. Sheesh. Who woke up at this point? England, France, and the Netherlands. Peter Pan's Netherland? No, my friend. Netherlands stepped afoot and took over the Portuguese colonies in Asia. We'll take them all, come here all of you. They took over Malacca, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, Moluccas Islands, Malabar South Coast, Coromandel, Surat, and southern Taiwan, to use the latter as a base for their attacks against Philippines, captured by who? If you got it right, I'll give you an island. Spain, my friend. Netherlands took it from Spain eventually, who then built a colony in Japan. In the 17th century, the Tokugawa shogunate ruling Japan at the time expelled the Portuguese out of worry as they spread Christianity. That's when Netherlands took over trade routes between Japan and Europe. Until who comes along? Britain and France. That's a gang, abo Meade. What's going on? That's one of the main reasons that explain why there are rich and poor countries. One of them. There was a gang of European countries that went, this is mine. That is not mine. This is blah and that's blah, and they fought over them. What about us, the natives, though? Anyway, France built a few colonies, but Britain extended its power to Bengal, and built a colony in Malaysia on Penang Island, and expelled the Dutch from Ceylon, took over it and the nearby Maldives. For summer vacations, you know. After struggles with France and Netherlands, it took most of their colonies in India, to be the dominant European power in the region. They then established what's called British Raj. Britain kept expanding more and more until it takes over Manipur, Assam, Rakhine, and southern Burma. Then they expanded in Malaysia, and built a colony in Singapore. They left the Netherlands in Sumatra, and acknowledged its control over Indonesia to get Netherlands to let go of their properties in India. The British expansion in Asia continued. That was the European colonization of Asia in a nutshell. Let me tell you, that the spices that in a time were a gift of these countries, turned into curses, they wished they didn't have any. The seek behind spices used to flavor food, not even the food itself, formed a history with all its bloodshed and justice. That begs the question. Why? What's about spices that got humanity go crazy? Especially Europeans? Eat in silence, Europeans please. Let me explain, my friend, why spices had us running around, and tell you this surprise. Ready? Spices are poison. What? Spices are poison. What? As if I won't know you when you change angles. Plants are prey organisms, a prey that needs defense mechanisms to survive the predator, like a prey having claws to scratch you if you held it, or to change its color to be hidden from the predator. Same thing goes for plants with their predators like herbivorous and vegans. Some plants defend itself through thorns like cactus or lemon trees, or being extremely tall like palm trees, or having thick bark like camphor tree. But the most famous plant defense mechanism is chemical defense. Dangerous. A plant stores an amount of toxic chemicals in its body, for when it's eaten by a herbivorous, so it either kills it or causes it pain, or cause it some problems, so the one that ate, learns its lesson to not go near that plant again. Just like toxic frogs, they have poison covering its skin to not be eaten. Same goes for plants, they leaves their poison in their fruits, stems, or roots. The hot pepper, for example, has a chemical compound called capsaicin. This compound is known to be irritant for mammals that has specific taste receptors in their tongues, so this capsaicin touches the tongue and causes irritation, so the animal goes and stays away from it. Guess what? An animal loved it. That animal is obviously man. Because he loves chili. He went, "Oh, it's amazing, give me more." The plant goes, "Oh man, that was our defense mechanism. We got over the phase of eating to survive, we now stress eat. We eat when we stress, not stress for not eating. No, we stress then eat." Same goes for all spices. These poisons became just a new flavor, because we have higher endurance, and more complex digestion of poisons than small organisms like insects. And ask the most vicious herbivore on Earth. These vicious organisms are the decomposers, which are living organisms like bacteria and fungi. Poisons stored in these plants prevent the decomposition effect of these bacteria and fungi. Without these chemicals, the decomposers eat the plants. Moving on from plants to humans, for the ancient people who hunted cows or mammoths to eat, they didn't have a fridge for the leftovers, so if we had certain chemicals that prevent bacteria and fungi from decomposing the meat I'm putting away, then why not, human, check out this red fruit that irritates my tongue, and try putting it on the food I want to preserve, or if we wrap the meat with some of leaves that have pungent smell. And indeed, these methods delayed the food rotting, which made these plants, despite not adding it much to the food, as much important as the food itself. Because without them, food would decompose and rot. These poisons made us survive in times when we couldn't get new food. And if the food had rotten, we put these things on it to cover the smell. So, whoever could eat more seasoned food, ate safer food. So these simple spice one way or another, were essential to our existence and life, and also one way or another, our bodies had to find a way to enjoy the taste of these poisons, look for them, fight for them, conquer continents for them, and love their taste. But the problem was that the distribution of spice wasn't the same in all places. How? Abo mead. I'll tell you. When you don't want the food to go bad, you put it in the fridge. Why? Because bacteria likes heat. Me too. The hotter the weather is, the faster the food goes bad. Same goes for the planet's geography. The hotter regions on Earth are the most abundant and diverse in spice, because if the food is left out, it would rot, it's hot. So there had to be these spices that we can use to keep our food good, like tropical and semi-tropical regions. Tropical sounds as if it's most local juice shops in Egypt. And that's for plants to defend themselves against bacteria. Plants in these tropical regions needed more chemicals to help them save themselves from decomposition. While in cold regions like Europe, plants didn't need to do that, so they didn't produce spice, so Europeans didn't find them. In the moderate and cold regions, it's the opposite of tropical. The temperature could drop to below zero in winter, so the food will stay good even if left in the streets, with no need to season it or put it in a fridge, and preserving food was very important in winter, because food's availability is less. Animals are in hibernation, and plants shrink. So the time needed to preserve food is the time when it won't go bad. But in hot and tropical regions, we need to store food during drought seasons, because drought causes less food availability in higher temperature, so we need to season it or it would rot. That's why the English food is bland, and the Indian food is exotic. That made Europeans go all over the world to get spice. Carrefour was there though, not at the time, my friend. These expeditions, and the ones before them of Arabs and silk traders, established globalization big time. Once humans met one another and saw they looked different, they acted like any senseless creatures who saw a herd different from theirs. They got confused, freaked out, killed, and oppressed one another. But in the end, we're all humans, and they all came for a pinch of nutmeg and cumin. Spices may seem like trivial products, but they caused catastrophes on the planet, and in a way, drew the modern world map. That's it. Last but not least, don't forget to watch the old episodes and the new ones, look at the sources, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Last but not least, I would like to suggest my theory in keeping the loved one. What's the theory? Abo mead. The theory says, to keep the loved one, season him. That's the concept of seasoning loved ones. Take the loved one, a pinch of cumin, a pinch of coriander,